What are you seeing in deglobalization that we hear about, but is it actually happening? When it comes to bringing things back to shores of, economies like United States or
Yeah,
Canada,
so
Europe.
I mean, the whole macro position right now is incredibly complicated. I mean, we had COVID, which basically demonstrated that white collar jobs are exportable, because you can now do, your lawyering job sitting at a desk anywhere. So why would you have that desk in New York or San Francisco, where it's the most expensive desk space in the world? Why wouldn't you stick that in Bali or the Philippines? And so I think what you will see. Oh, and the other aspect with COVID was the blue collar aspect, which is supply chains got broken. We couldn't import stuff. We couldn't get stuff delivered. Logistics all broke down. Cost of a container 10x. It's now back down, but it was crazy.
Morning, everybody. Today we have Jeremy Harbour, and if you're not familiar with Jeremy, you need to go look him up. He's a creative thinker in the financial world and more in the mergers and acquisitions area. I've been following him for quite a long time, trying to piece together his strategies. I haven't taken his course yet, but certainly there's a lot to learn from this gentleman, and we're all privileged to have him on. So thank you for coming, Jeremy. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, well, it's again my pleasure. So
Yeah, yeah.
tell me about Jeremy. How did we get to, what's Jeremy's story? How did we get to Harbor Club and all of that?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I've probably told this a million times, so it's probably quite out there. So I'll try and do it in a slightly different way. I think it's interesting, you in your intro just saying, "Oh, I haven't done his course yet," because I think there are so many people out there that have a course, but they don't have the lessons behind it. They don't have the life that leads up to the course. And so mine is really, it's not a course really, it's an anti course. So I was an entrepreneur. I left school really young. I left school when I was 15, and because I was already running a business. That business actually failed when I was 18, and then I kind of dusted myself off and started a telecoms company. That grew really fast and successfully, but that was pretty much, the rising tide, all ships rise. Well, this is when every man and his dog were selling telephones. It was, the mobile phones were miniaturizing. It was the mid 1990s. It was a crazy time in telecoms. And so what happened in that industry is it started to consolidate. As you have in most industries, there's a boom and explosion where millions of companies set up overnight. And then there's a consolidation phase where it boils back down to a few companies. And part of that consolidation is the weak ones just dying, and part of it is M&A. Part of it is being bought out by the remaining ones. And so as a telecoms operator in those days, my meetings were either were either with customers to try and sell them more phones, or with people trying to buy my telephone company. And I very quickly realized that all the guys that were trying to buy my company, they didn't have any money either. They were as poor as I was, in terms of when you're growing a bootstrapped business, and I always described it as robbing Peter but not always paying Paul. You're kind of a dollar comes in and you're Jesus with the 5,000 when it comes to what you do with it. It's like, and that's just the nature of fast growth and being a bootstrapped entrepreneur. So this idea of going and buying a company for me just didn't seem like something that would even cross my mind or be realistic until probably maybe the 20th meeting with a company that was trying to buy my business without any money. And I just figured, fuck, I should be on the other side of this table. I should be the buyer, not the seller. I've got as much, if not more, to offer than these guys. In fact, in many cases, I could probably articulate it better than these guys. I could see what the selling points were, and they weren't giving them to me. So I went out and tried to be the buyer. Now, I was green as anything. I was really young. I always looked really young as well. This is one of my handicaps as an entrepreneur. Now I've got some gray hair, I can do anything. But back then I was like 22, 23, but I looked like 14. I described myself as a late shaver. And so I always struggled with plausibility. And so I must have looked an idiot walking into these meetings and trying to put these deals together. But anyway, I managed to find someone that was depressed and distressed enough that I could keep them away from the bottle of whiskey and the revolver for just long enough to get the deal done with them. And you know, it wasn't the best deal in the world, but I grew by a year's worth of sales in an afternoon, and I took no risk and I invested no cash. And for me, this was just an epiphany. It was like a whole new world opened up to me. And I've often described it as, you know, my early days of entrepreneurship, I thought there were basically three levers that you could play around with. One of them is how well you motivate and manage your team. One of them is how well you do marketing and find customers. And the other one is how good you are at closing those leads, how good you are at sales. So it was basically team, marketing, and sales. And those were the three things you could kind of fuck about with to improve a business. And what I tended to notice that people were strong in one area, or tended to be strong in one area. So, you know, the team guys could out team the others and survive. The marketing guys can out market the others and survive. And the sales guys could sell really well and survive. But that was pretty much all I thought there was. Then I figured out you could bolt a whole year's worth of sales on in an afternoon without involving the team, the sales, or the marketing. And it was like, holy shit, this is like a whole other world I didn't know existed. And to say it was an epiphany is kind of an understatement. I went on and bought 12 companies or 11 more companies. So I went up to 12 companies in the next 18 months. We went from like $1.5 million in revenue. This is pound sterling, but it's the more our politicians speak, the closer that gets to dollars at the moment. Back then, it was a little bit more. And this is 20 years ago as well, when $1.5 million was probably
A lot of money.
yeah, a lot more than that. Anyway, we got up to like 13.5 million in 18 months. So we you know, 10x the revenues of this business, and so it was a phenomenal kind of baptism of fire in terms of learning M&A, in terms of integrating businesses, in terms of understanding, you know, how everything's kind of put together. Made loads of mistakes, screwed a bunch of things up. Then yeah, basically sold one of the companies, and that was the next epiphany that shit, you make money when you sell them, not when you run them. So that was another big so epiphany number one, I guess, was that you can grow by acquisition. That was something that as an entrepreneur I'd never even thought of. I didn't put myself in a category that was even possible. And then the second big epiphany was, wow, if you sell them, you get capital. If you have capital, you have actually selling them gives you two things that entrepreneurs don't have. It gives you all your time back that you used to invest in that business, and it brings you capital. And the capital generates you passive income, if you're not stupid with it. Generates you passive income that then removes your time input to your income, which is a massive transformative thing that you can have as an entrepreneur, because suddenly you make better decisions. You're not making decisions from a point of desperation anymore. There's a whole bunch of things that get a lot better at that moment. Now, I got quite a bit of attention for doing this, particularly when I used to buy companies in an industry where other competitors would have quite happily paid money for those companies, and I was walking off with them for nothing. So I would routinely be asked by them, hey, come and work for us, come and be a consultant. Why don't you become a non-exec on our board and help us identify companies we can buy for no money? And I just used to think, well, the fuck would I do that? I mean, seriously, if I find the company, I'm just going to buy it. Why would I want a salary to help somebody else get all of the upside from that equity? So for me, it just seemed daft. You know, they couldn't make it make sense at all. Yeah. And then one of the companies I bought for no money down was a training seminar company. Yeah. So I buy this training seminar company. They're putting on an event, and I go along and I'm a speaker at the event, just because I just bought the company. Why not? So I do my little speech first, and then I go and sit at the back and watch all the others. And you know, the traditional seminar thing, they give you the presentation, then they give you the hard sell, run to the back of the room. You've got to buy this amazing one-time offer. I've only got 5 seats available. They're $1,997, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And I'm just sitting there watching this going, do you know what? I really hate this shit, because when I was a young entrepreneur, I used to go to these seminars thinking I was going to learn the thing that was advertised on the door or on the brochure. And then when you get there, it's just a pitch for and the pitch is to buy the thing that gives you the stuff that you thought you were going to get anyway. Mm-hmm. And when you're an entrepreneur, you really value your time. You know, you could be spending that time in such a more valuable way than being pitched by somebody else, and often paying to be pitched by somebody else. You know,
Yeah.
Okay, it was a low price point. What did I expect? And all the usual things, but still, I found it a massive waste of time. And particularly the ones that were like 2 and 3 day events. So you have the 3 day event where the first day is basically just telling you how fucking awesome the second day is going to be. Then the second day is the massive pitch, and then the third day is the pressure close on the massive pitch from day two. And you kind of get to the end of it just thinking, what was this? Why did I spend,
Yeah.
this is 3 days of my life I'll never get back. So
Yeah.
I basically started to look through the lens of owning this company and saying, well, actually, a membership training type program for mergers and acquisitions in small business would be a great way to monetize my knowledge, particularly the knowledge I don't actually use that much anymore. So, for example, I did, my first like 50 deals with distressed companies. So, bankrupt companies, distressed assets, businesses that were going bust. Now, pretty much all the deals I do is taking companies public, larger scale sort of M&A stuff. So I don't use those tactics anymore, but they work really well. We've got loads of people in our community that are constantly honing them and improving them, so we keep them all up to date. Why not share the love and get other entrepreneurs on this amazing journey? And I thought, but I want to do it differently. I'm going to do a seminar where there's no upsell, there's no mastermind gold platinum partnership program or some bullshit at the end of it. You pay the money, you get a fire hose of information over 3 days, and then you join a community of kind of like-minded people who are all actually running around doing deals. So the way we really differ from other deal maker type programs or training courses around M&A is that I actually did this for 20 years and I've got hundreds of deals under my belt that I can point to that are publicly demonstrable. The last 70 deals or something have been with public companies, so they're literally in the public domain. So demonstrable 20 years of actually doing this shit, another 10 years plus of actually teaching this shit. The first Harbour Club delegate was in 2009. Endless case studies of people that have done deals and stuff that we publish through our app. Some of them make it out into the wild, but most of them stay inside the community. And something that actually delivers. We have about 70 bullet points on our promotional material, and you get them all in the first 3 days with nothing else you have to buy, no other hoops you have to jump through, no other bullshit that you have to get involved in. You can literally join a community where there is no pressure to ever have to give us another penny ever again. You just get the information and become part of a community. If you're active in the community, you can make friends, you can publish your own content in the community. We encourage that because it really helps everybody with the learning. You can partner up with people, you can do all that stuff, but you can't buy anything else. And so we created it as the anti-course or the anti-seminar for exactly that reason. I'm way too busy doing deals, so I literally just my marketing guys get the people into the Harbour Club community, and I literally just turn up and speak.
Well, I love the transparency, and I can attest to anybody listening that, Jeremy adds the value every single time. And that is why, I mean, for example, we're talking today because you reached out to say, hey, how can I help you with X? And then, I said, okay, well, and you added value. You said this, do this, 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 and this. And then I said, well, I wasn't, that's great, but I'm also thinking I'm doing this financial podcast. Anyway, the point of the story is that Jeremy does deliver, and it's amazing the value you add for free. You go on YouTube, you can see Jeremy, the things he gives away are unbelievable. So I want to you brought up so many things there, like going public and no money down and all of that stuff. But I wanted to kind of get into, the people side of things a little bit, your experience with fear is a big thing, right? For people, and how did you get through that fear? Did you ever have any fear at the beginning, like your first transaction? And I know that that's limited me in the past, and it does for a lot of people. Like what made you do it? What made you get through?
Yeah, it is a challenge. I think actually, when I look at the most successful entrepreneurs I ever bump into, these people aren't smarter than anybody else. In fact, I think if they were smarter, they probably wouldn't have done the things that they've done, because the rationale or the rationality of what they're attempting to achieve would overcome them. And it's kind of the same. when you do startups and you grow businesses from scratch, it's really fucking hard, but you've never done it before. So you kind of just get on with it and you bump your head and you figure it out as you go along. And failure is not really an option. So you just keep going forwards. Once you know how hard that is, it's very hard to embark on something else that's as challenging. And M&A is as big a sphere as startup is in terms of what there is to understand. And so, blessed with the knowledge of how hard a startup is, it's very hard for people to say, okay, I now want to start on something completely fucking new where I'm a novice again. And the older you get, the harder it is to start from being a novice again. But everything you'll ever do, you have to be a novice at some point. And everything you've ever learned, you've figured it out. And so, it's kind of just understanding your own limitations in terms of it's not that bad. You will figure it out. It's going to be okay, kind of thing. And and I think I see this a lot with people that are learning, is they feel like they have to know everything before they'll do anything. And that's the massive mistake. You have to start before you're ready. Whatever it is you're doing, you have to start before you're ready. If you read those books on how to speak any language in 3 months, the fundamental principle is you have to start now. So you have to just decide that from today, I'm only going to speak French. And if I don't understand what I want to say, I'll have to look it up until I know how to say it, and then I'll speak it. And you can basically master any language in 90 days if you refuse to speak anything other than that language. Obviously helps if you're around people, I guess, that can understand what the fuck you're saying. But it's like,
yeah, of course.
but in terms of a learning principle, this idea of just both feet first, immersing yourself into a particular situation and getting on with it is quite powerful. Now, one thing I would say, particularly around distressed acquisitions and M&A, is it's relatively easy to protect yourself in terms of protecting yourself financially and legally so that you don't get yourself in too much of a pickle. It's much harder to protect other people. There are other people's lives at stake in this stuff. I mean, not their life and death type lives, but their their financial lives, their futures. So people's jobs are at risk, people's livelihoods are at risk, and so you do educating yourself enough before you go bowling in is highly recommended. But once you do understand the basic principles, then I think it can be a really valuable thing to do, because oftentimes you do save jobs and you do improve the lives of people around you. But of course, yeah, you do need to understand that you're embarking on something, fairly serious. But yeah, I think the key is to start before you're ready, understand the basic principles, but then kind of get on with it, because all of the experience comes from doing, not from, you could read 1,000 books about how to play tennis, but until you pick up a racket and beat a ball around a court, the books aren't going to be that useful.
Yeah, well, and yeah, let me add a few things. I mean, reading a book isn't getting experience. And also, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what questions to ask until you take the action, right? I mean, that's been my experience. So, what's the alternative? You're stuck in the life that you hate, and moving forward, progress, not perfection, I guess, is the you think.
And look, this is the biggest thing about deal making. So when I first bought companies, I had this conversation with somebody this morning, which is quite funny. When I bought my first companies, when you're a young entrepreneur, you think like basically the younger you are, the more you know. Yeah, like you really feel like you know everything. So basically, I would buy these companies and I would immerse myself in them. I would get involved in the day-to-day operations. I'm trying to fix everything. I'm trying to change everything. I'm trying to, really put my stamp on it. And basically, I kind of burnt myself out. People often said, oh, wow, you have these 12 companies, you're doing this 13.5 million revenue, you're paying yourself a big salary, you have a beautiful house and a beautiful car and all these kind of things. And it was like, yeah, but you know what? The only thing worse than running one shit company is running 12 shit companies. And it's really hard and incredibly stressful. And I basically burnt myself out to the point where I kind of had this, do you know what? I would rather it went fucking bankrupt than I had to turn up on Monday. And it literally got to that kind of point. And do you know what? It didn't go bankrupt. And it actually worked perfectly okay without me.
Wow.
And it was kind of then that I suddenly had the humility to realize that I wasn't really adding as much value as I felt I was. I was making myself busy in all of these organizations almost unnecessarily. I mean, of course, you have some impact, but when I really pulled back from it, all of the time and effort and stress that I would take on myself, if you put it into dollar terms, in terms of what it added to a transaction when it came to selling the company, or what it added in terms of speeding up a transaction, i.e. how quickly you could get your money, the effect was so close to zero, it had
Yeah.
no impact. And I actually realized by doing less, I got way more lifestyle and way more money way more quickly. And so literally by getting out the fucking way of these things and just focusing on the transaction, life became infinitely better. And it was at that time I actually made the conscious decision to, I'd made this really big leap, which was when you start a company, you're kind of ingrained in it naturally, because when on day one you did everything,
Yeah.
every job was your job. And then as you employed people to replace you, you still kind of kept a bit of a tab on that job. And so you can get to 20 people, 30 people, or 50 people, you're still ingrained in the day-to-day operations. Well, the great thing is if you sell that company and go and buy another one the same sort of size, the one that you've bought, you've never done any of the jobs in that one. So you have none of this hangover of work that goes into it. So if you want to be a hands-off shareholder at that point, it's a very easy transition to make. Very hard to be a hands-off shareholder in a company you started, but very easy in one that you just bought. And yeah, and that was kind of lesson one. Lesson two was, could I leave the country and this all still works? And so I actually did the first time I left the country was for a bet. So we were watching the football, which you call soccer, but it's
Yeah.
the one that we play everywhere in the world.
The
It's
real
called
football.
football. Yeah, yeah. And so we were watching the World Cup. This was in 2000, I think it must have been six. And had a friendly bet with a friend on the outcome of a particular game we were watching. And we said whoever loses the bet has to go and live in the country that wins the World Cup. And so
Wow.
I lost the bet. And so I'm watching, and it comes down like Cameroon are doing really well. So I was preparing myself for some African time, but then Italy won. So ended up moving to Italy. I only did 3 months there, but I moved to Italy when I was employing 150 people, had 5 companies, and I lived there for 3 months. And I actually found it really empowering to live abroad but still run companies back in my home country, and deal with the things. It makes you focus on working on the business instead of in it, because you can't physically be in it.
Yeah.
And this is early days of internet. I mean, 2006 was early days of internet. So there was email, there was basic kind of I think it was AOL and shit like that back
Oh
then.
my
So
gosh.
it was very early. So it wasn't like Zoom and all these
Yeah.
wonderful tools that we have now, which basically can make you pretty much in the office when you're out of the office.
Yeah.
But it started my kind of affair with living abroad, and 2 years later I moved full time to Mallorca in Spain. I used to do the winters in Bali. I had a company in Singapore, so I ended up living in Singapore for 13 years. And that's been a wonderful education, living in other countries. Also, that adult decision of choosing where to live based on things like how safe they are, how good the schools are, how good the hospitals are, how good the education system is, how much crime there is. I lived in Singapore where there's, it's the lowest crime rate in the world. I now live in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai, incredibly low crime rate here as well, great medical care,
Yeah.
all of those things. So you get to have this adult decision around where you live, and the pros and cons, and yeah, experience different cultures and get your kids growing up in different cultures and meeting kids from other places. And yeah, it's been a wonderful journey.
That would be absolutely. I love the working on it, not in it. I mean, that's something that a lot of business owners, well, they don't know what they don't know, but I really hope that that message comes across to everybody. And where I'm going with that though is it's interesting how you got there, but what is the value of that when you're exiting a business?
The value of you not being in it,
Yes.
enormous. So if you sell a business if you're actively involved in the business day to day and you sell it, at least 30 to 50% of the value of the business will be deferred based on you sticking around. And you'll have to stick around for an indefinite period of time, probably 2 or 3 years, in order to get that additional part of the proceeds. I actually saw one of my Harbour Club members. So one of the things I recommend is using mergers to get you out of the operational side of the business. So effectively, let's say you have your metal business, and you're in it every day, well, you could merge with another metal company. You can become non-executive, like become the chairman or whatever, and the CEO from the other one takes over running both of them. Works really well because they know how to run the business. They know that, you know, they know it inside out. It's not like recruiting someone and hoping it all works out. You know, this person is capable because they're doing that job right now, and they would probably relish the idea of running something bigger. So we use it quite often as a succession plan, because the other guy will always want to be CEO. So you can give them that job of being CEO and they can feel like they've won. Whereas in fact, you're now sitting on the beach asking for the KPI reports every Friday. And then who do you think's won? But this particular Harbour clubber listened to me but didn't take the advice. He merged with an American company. He was in the UK, merged with an American company in the same sphere. He became the CEO. The other guy sat on the beach with 50% of the company. And he actually had an offer to buy the company for £18 million, which, like I say, back then that was a good dose of dollars, probably nearly 30.
Yeah.
But the deal was 50% cash to the guy sitting on the beach, 50% deferred over 5 years for this guy who had to then work as an employee of this big company that was going to buy them. So he would have a corporate job for the next 5 years and get paid his half over that 5-year period, provided he stuck around and hit certain targets and did certain things. And so they had a massive falling out over this, because obviously the guy on the beach is going, fuck it, yeah, I'm in, let's go, let's sell. And the other guy is going, no, I don't want to. Anyway, it ended up being the death of the company. Not only did it not sell, the whole thing collapsed over the disagreement that ensued from that moment. So being out of the business is quite important. Having a good shareholders agreement that copes with those sort of situations as well is a good idea. We have some clauses that we regularly use to deal with that sort of scenario. But yeah, being non-executive in your business is very important when it comes to selling.
Okay, good, thank you. When it comes to, so you mentioned, shareholders agreement and all that stuff. What's your feeling and thoughts around accountants and lawyers? There's advice on both sides. Don't do it. You need to do financial reporting through one of the big fours to get funding. If that's the route you're going, what would you say to that?
Yeah, look, I mean, accountants and lawyers are very useful, but you always have to give them a very specific remit of the work you expect them to do. If you give them too wide a remit, then it's just a blank check and you're going to run up endless costs. I mean, really accounting should be around, year end and tax related stuff. I've never really raised money, so I couldn't testify to whether or not a big four is better for that or not better for that.
Okay.
So yeah, we've not done lots of capital raising stuff. I mean, certainly, again, we've used a big four sign off for a couple of things. But generally what we do is we do the work first. And then we give it to them to say, do you agree with our workings? And we get like a letter from them instead of getting them to do the report. So we do the report and we get a letter from them saying, yeah, this report kind of makes sense.
Okay.
The calculations are the sort of thing. So for example, a discounted cash flow valuation, if you get Deloitte to do it, it'll cost you 100 grand, or you can do it and get Deloitte to write a letter for 10 grand that says, yeah, you did it right, which has a similar weighting. And
that's what it is, right? It's having that name on it to say, yeah, okay, it's the bank.
Someone they can sue if it all goes wrong. Yeah.
That too. Yeah. Who can I blame? Yeah, I'm glad you said it, not me.
And then, yeah, I mean, lawyers wise, never engage lawyers in the negotiation phase of M&A. That's a disaster. That's like having, inviting another person on a date when you're, trying to find the woman of your dreams. It's like a third wheel.
Yeah. Why? Okay. So my experience has been, they're so one-sided that they don't have any leeway for anything but what's good for the one side. So
yeah, I mean so with contracts, you definitely see that. I call it author bias, which is whoever wrote the contract is going to be really one-sided. But I mean, what you really need to do, and so look, I'm also talking here about owner-managed businesses and small businesses. These are the kind of deals that we do. In the corporate world, of course, it will be two teams of advisors thrash out a deal. They put it to the vote of the shareholders. It's a slightly different transaction. But when you're dealing with an owner-manager, it's very much you and them. So you and them agree the deal. you flesh out the terms of the deal, and then you ask the lawyers to put that into a format that would be legally compliant, and make sure that it reflects what you've agreed. And that's a very different request than saying, I want to buy this company, go. And this is where this is what a lot of people do when they're instructing lawyers. It's like, oh, this guy wants to buy us. Can you help us? And the lawyer
Right.
goes, fuck yeah, I'm going to make a
Yeah.
shitload out of this.
I've made that mistake. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and
it's
it's
costly.
a never ending one. Look, I think you said your last interview you did was about economics. Well, economics 101 is the law of incentives, which is, you get what you pay for. So if you pay someone by the hour, guess what? You get lots of hours. It's you're basically rewarding. You're building your reward system around the time it takes to do something. So of course it's going to take fucking ages.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that. Appreciate it. So, I mean, in this one case, what's happened is I was, in contact with the owners for, a year and a half, building rapport and, actually starting to, really care about them. But then they bring their advisors in and lawyers and accountants and whatnot, and that's where it gets difficult. Do you have any recommendations around, that sort of situation? Is it just move on to
Yeah.
the
So
next one, or?
Yeah, so the normal starting point is to point out to them that of course they must be represented and they must get proper legal
Well,
advice.
yes. Yeah.
However, I'm dealing with you. I'm not dealing with your lawyer. So we'll deal with this together, and then you can go away, get your advice, and you can come back and we can discuss it. But I'm not going to start engaging with the lawyer because I know where it goes. They'll insist I get a lawyer, and then they'll tickle each other's bellies, and before you know it, we've spent 100 grand and we haven't got a deal done. I actually spoke to an M&A guy at one of the biggest law firms in the world. He was the London representative of the firm, and I pointed out to him that how many deals I see that don't go through. And he actually said, you know what, the deal that doesn't go through is often our ideal deal. It goes on for 2 years, it runs up massive fees, and then it doesn't complete. And because it doesn't complete, there's no professional indemnity risk to the firm, because you can't be sued for something that didn't happen. But they get all the fees. The lawyers always get paid, and so that's kind of their bread and butter is the stuff that takes ages and doesn't work.
So like you say, the incentives, correct? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
everybody's incentives are misaligned, it seems. And I mean, I know some brokers and they're great people, but brokers also can be difficult in that regard.
Mhm.
Um, do you ever deal with brokers? And I mean, would you recommend it or not? Or
No, so we don't. In my experience, they don't add a lot of value. I mean, there's a few things that a business needs to have in order to, um, in order to sell, and it needs to have a really good data room. All the information about the company needs to be in one place. They need to have their accounts kind of knocked into shape, ideally audited. But certainly they need to have got rid of, the nanny and the personal expenses and stuff that are being run through the books. That needs to be presented in the right way. They need a really good information memorandum that kind of sets out the business. Well, the brokers seem more concerned about just charging an upfront fee than actually making sure all of that shit is together. And also they're particularly bad when it comes to sort of coaching companies on how they should deal with prospective buyers, what deal structures are normal to expect. You get so many sellers coming onto the market that are massively overpriced because the brokers told them they're going to get this money, thoroughly unprepared to sell their company. I mean, it's a fucking shambles.
yeah,
And insisting that the only deal they're going to do is one that's 100% cash up front.
yeah,
You can literally show them and say, look, if I bought Microsoft bonds, I would get a better return on my capital than I would buying your highly volatile company that falls over the day you fucking walk out the door.
yeah,
It's like, why
yeah.
would I do that? And they can't explain it, but they're still pretty sure that's what they want. So,
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, is that programming? Like, is that what brokers tell each other?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges, it's a little bit different in the US because the US, at least, broking is a regulated activity, whereas I think in many other countries it's not. But I still think it's regulated, but not fantastically ethical. And the challenge is that they keep the lights on and the employees employed through the upfront fees they charge people to list. So they're basically listing businesses. So the core activity of the business is getting new listings. If they accidentally sell one, it's kind of a bonus. It's not. It doesn't seem to be core to the business model, and that's reflected in the numbers. I mean, in the UK, we had one of the brokers go public, so we got access to quite a bit of data in the
Right.
prospectus that they issued, and that showed that 10% of the companies that list sell.
Oh my.
And you have to imagine that 10% of the companies have got somebody that's just died or is about to die or is in some dire situation that it means they have to sell. So, it really does seem like, perhaps they're the ones that are selling,
Yeah.
and the remainder of them just won't, but they're collecting their listing fees. And that's what, like I say, keeps the lights on.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So 100% cash. Um, does that ever happen?
Not really, not in my experience.
Either. I haven't
It's,
seen.
I mean, for a start, also, look, I advise people when they're selling as well, the 100% cash bit, the cash that you can get off them on day one, okay, that's a great starting point. Now, what about negotiating some deferred payment? Why
Sure.
not get some money over time? And then what about an earnout? What about saying, hey, look, if this thing hits it out the park next year, I want a piece of it? Because let's face it, it's a asymmetric bet, isn't it? You put nothing in, you can only win, you can't lose. So why wouldn't you have an earnout? And some people think an earnout is like a dirty word. There's no point in, I don't even want to discuss it. Well, if you don't even want to discuss it, you're really leaving shit on the table that you could have got in the future. They expect to be wildly successful with your business, or they wouldn't be sitting there talking to you. So let's take a bet. If they are wildly successful, I want a bet. It's,
Yeah. Yeah.
why
Absolutely.
not? Why not? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. What do you see as a, I mean, you gave us an example earlier, but I mean, I'm sure you see some failures happen, right? I mean, what are the main thing? Like, is there one thing that always happens, or is there a couple things?
There's a bunch of things. They tend to revolve around paying too much for the businesses. So it just can't make sense financially. Over leveraging, so borrowing too much money to buy businesses, and then right now, for example, interest rates go up, costs go up, you're fucked.
Yeah.
Ego-driven roll-ups where they're too obsessed with changing the name above the door, and making it all about the me show. Those tend to fail quite quickly. I see those fail a lot. People obsessed with the synergies, so they want to buy these small companies and then change the way they do everything. And ultimately, what you're buying is all that inertia that they've created through doing what they do. So fucking leave them alone, at least for a little while. It's like,
Well, that was
just
one of the greatest things I learned from you. Sorry to interrupt you, but the,
yeah,
well, it was the humility part of it. Like, take your
yeah,
ego out of it and
yeah,
go with the brand. Like, they've been working on this, they know it better than you, so
yeah,
build upon that. Don't go in and slap
yeah.
your name on it. So thank you.
Yeah, you'll change the name and then spend the next 6 months explaining to everybody that this is just the new name for the old one. Actually, it's still the old one and everything's the same, but we've called it this now. I mean, it's just the first 20 minutes of every conversation saved. It's like, yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, exactly. Saving some
Like,
energy.
hi, I'm Jeff. Why are you Jeff? No, I'm still Jeremy. I'm just calling myself Jeff now. And it's like, and all marketing people are obsessed with this. We've got to rebrand. We've got to rebrand. It's like, why? It's like,
Yeah,
no, leave it
yeah,
alone.
fair
It's
enough.
not important. Some of the best companies in the world have shitty names. I wouldn't worry about
Oh, exactly. That's not what builds a culture or a business. The business,
Exactly.
I mean, well, it does and it doesn't. There's a brand that comes along with that name that's already been established, right? I mean, why
Yeah,
why would you destroy that? And,
exactly.
yeah. Inflation. So what's happening in M&A when it comes to, obviously we're seeing inflation happening all over the world. And
Yeah.
what are you seeing out there? Are people more careful, or is less M&A happening in 2023? What
Um, Yeah, it's weird this year actually. So the first half of the year was incredibly busy. There's lots going on at the moment, but not much closing. So the summer was like dead in the middle. But there's lots of activity. People want to do stuff right now, but for some reason it's not quite crystallizing. I think there will be a little flurry towards the end of the year where people want to get stuff done, and then always January is a big year, a big time because a lot of people make decisions over Christmas and they want to execute in first quarter, and get things moving and get things done. Yeah, we've got, it's particularly pernicious having, the inflation, the high interest rates, the supply chain challenges that we've had, yeah, and a war and all those kind of things all going on at the same time. It's a little bit of a perfect shitstorm. But having said that, businesses with pricing power do very, very well in those kind of environments. You'd be better off being in business than in cash in terms of asset allocation. But obviously, leverage buyouts must be looking, they're pretty scary right now. Businesses that don't have pricing power, reliant on contracts won by tender, for example, and things like that can be a slightly hairy place to be. But generally speaking, I mean, there's a little bit of tightening in terms of liquidity, but generally business is still quite buoyant. There is, anecdotally anyway, through the businesses that I'm talking to, there's still shit getting done and stuff going on. So it doesn't feel full on recession-y, even if the technicals are showing a bit of a recession at the moment. The general spirit out there seems to be pretty strong. The media is doing a really good job of talking us into a recession. You watch the media, you'd think it's it feels like the media at the beginning of 2009, end of 2008, which was real, gun in your mouth time sort of stuff. So it feels a bit like that. But what I see on the street, it feels actually fairly
Good,
buoyant.
good. Excellent. So, investing abroad, that's something I've never really thought about. I mean, you have. I mean,
Mm.
has it been emerging markets or is it, established
Yeah,
economy?
so in terms of M&A, we focus on the mature economies
Yeah.
and countries where you can own shit. That's kind of important to
Oh,
us.
wow. Yeah.
So we've and being English, I stick to the English speaking ones as well. So it tends to be Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, the UK, the US, and Canada are our primary kind of markets. And there is still a weighting to the UK. I'm British. It's my it's where I'm from, so kind of I guess it's always easier to do deals there. So yeah, I would say probably 50% of the deals are still UK, and the other 50% spread out through those other jurisdictions. From a personal investment standpoint, I'm in my sort of personal portfolio, it's very US heavy. In fact, the whole portfolio is US dollar denominated, and a bit of Europe. I have almost no Asia exposure left. I used to have some, but yeah, it's pretty much all US and a little bit of Europe.
Okay. My head always goes here because, I'm in the industrial type. That's where my head is at always. What are you seeing in deglobalization that we hear about, but is it actually happening? When it comes to bringing things back to shores of, economies like United States or
Yeah,
Canada,
so
Europe.
the whole macro position right now is incredibly complicated. I mean, we had COVID, which basically demonstrated that white collar jobs are exportable because you can now do, your lawyering job sitting at a desk anywhere. So why would you have that desk in New York or San Francisco, where it's the most expensive desk space in the world? Why wouldn't you stick that in Bali or the Philippines? And so I think what you'll see. Oh, and the other aspect with COVID was the blue collar aspect, which is supply chains got broken. We couldn't import stuff. We couldn't get stuff delivered. Logistics all broke down. Cost of a container 10x. It's now back down, but it was crazy. So I think what that will do is it will create a trend where white collar jobs gradually leave and blue collar jobs gradually come back onshore. Then there's also the threat of China has suddenly, people have woken up to it. Whereas before what they felt was if we made them all rich, they'd want to be like us. And what we've done is we made them all rich and they're against us. And so consequently, after 30 years of one-way traffic with China, I think everybody's now doubling down. And in fact, the US's latest microchip ban is actually quite an aggressive move. Didn't get that much media, but was a really aggressive move in terms of trying to cut off China from technology in the rest of the world. And you have to remember the Chinese economy has some really significant challenges right now, in that about 70% of their domestic economy is driven by real estate, and that's basically all but collapsed with the Evergrande scandal and the fact they're building way more houses than they need and all of this kind of stuff. They've got a massive demographic issue. They've got a massive power issue. Their factories are only getting 8 hours of power a day instead of 24 hours of power. a day. And they've still got this zero COVID policy, which is shutting down whole cities and factories and stopping things from being produced. So this is going to move huge amounts of manufacturing out of China and into the satellite countries initially, like India and Vietnam and Cambodia and places like that. But of course, a lot of it will also, people will have, okay, we'll move half of it to India and we'll bring some into the US as well, or Mexico, or somewhere close by that's perhaps a lower cost. To shorten those supply chains, and so that's going to have a really long-lasting, damaging effect on China. And also there's a conspiratorial part of me that thinks that the interest rate rises we're going through at the moment are more targeted at destroying Russia and China than they are at helping inflation, because the inflation that we're seeing is mainly energy costs, which is driven from the war, and supply chain costs, which is driven from the logistics increase in prices. So cutting consumer spending doesn't really help either of those two things. But what it does do is it really cripples Russia and China, because if you drive consumer spending down, they buy less, oil and gas. That puts the oil and gas price below $60, and then Russia goes bankrupt. They can't afford to get their oil out of the ground.
Wow.
And China, the only bit of their economy left that's functioning is the manufacture of consumer goods. So if you kill the consumer, they can't buy consumer goods, and then China's finished as well. So I think they maybe see this as an opportunity, a 6-month window, that if they can crash the economies in Europe and the US at the same time, they can get rid of their two biggest foes. I don't like conspiracy theories normally, but the fact that Liz Truss in the UK got appointed as Prime Minister, announced that she was going to do a budget for growth, and 2 weeks later, the Goldman Sachs guy has been installed to run the country instead. Does make me think there might be a conspiracy there.
Very interesting, Jeremy. Yeah, that could be. It's hard to know. We don't know, right?
I
But
know, it's like, hey, look, I always say about these kind of these conspiracies and things, it's wonderful to have the ideas and the beliefs and all that sort of stuff, but it doesn't change anything. So you kind of,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, the ropes around the boxing ring of life are there, and the fight goes on in the middle, and we can't do anything about where the ropes are.
Absolutely. That's right. We got to worry about with the things that we can control, right? As Stephen
Exactly.
Covey would say.
Yeah.
So just a few more things. I'm curious, what how you're seeing the employment. I know that that's an issue I hear a lot about. We can't find and keep good people. Is that happening for you? And or even people you work with or
Mm.
partner with,
I mean,
what's
look, certainly my direct employees, that I'm not seeing any change. I mean, look, I live in Dubai. It's the center of the world, literally, if you look at the map. And it's very open to immigration. So we really don't have any employment problems here. You can get staff so easily into this area. But I do see it in the companies that we've bought and sold. So stuff in the UK and in Canada and the US, getting skilled labor particularly is incredibly hard.
yeah,
And actually, there was a bit of me that kind of thought, okay, well, this is one of the positives of inflation, is it's going to be really good for the working class, because the working class has been underpaid for the last 3 decades.
yeah,
If they end up getting paid a bit more, then that can only be a good thing.
yeah.
And now
Oh, I lost you. You there?
keep raising rates, pretty much saying that one of the key reasons they're raising rates is to drive unemployment up, which obviously smashes consumer demand and reduces inflation. So you understand the argument, but it's a shame because it did feel like post-COVID we were going to get some of the inflation was going to filter through to the
The internet. I don't know what's going on.
job. But it's good for communities because if those people are earning more, they spend more. If they spend more, then the economy does better. And every additional dollar you give to a working class person gets spent. The additional dollar you give to the management probably goes into derivatives.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly. What are your thoughts? I keep losing you. My internet's cutting in and out. I don't know if you can still hear me. what are your thoughts on a resurgence of types like carlicahn and these guys as shareholder activists? I think that we're going to see that happen again. I'm curious what you think about that because a lot of these corporations are so top heavy, right? I mean, and that's changing right now, but I'm curious if we may see some more people come up like carlicahn. Are you there? I think I lost you again. Oh man.
Oh, you froze there for a second.
Yeah, did you? Yeah, you froze for a few seconds. Yeah,
Ah, okay. One of us is freezing.
I think it's me.
So yeah, no, look, I think there's lots of opportunity. I think there's a lot of cumbersome, expensive boards and companies out there, and I think, of course, it needs to be addressed. I mean, Twitter obviously is the one that's been in the news just recently. I mean, the excesses of that board over the last 10 years was horrific. I mean, I think 5 billion they got paid.
Oh,
5 billion for a board of directors. I mean, in a private company, you'd expect people to rip the arse out of it because that's the whole point of having your own business, isn't it? It's yours. But when you're a public company, it belongs to everybody, and you would have thought the transparency and scrutiny of being a public company would stop that sort of thing from happening, but it seems to be getting more and more rife. So yeah, I think there's definitely some lessons to be learned there.
yeah, absolutely. Cool. So anybody that's looking to start, like an entrepreneur or coming up and coming entrepreneur, I mean, what would you say to them? I believe that, going into mergers and acquisitions is a smart decision because it's de-risked. You're not going through all that bootstrapping crap. But how does somebody start thinking about that and getting started, besides taking your course, of course? I'm
Yeah,
curious.
no, look, you don't need to take my course. I think you need to understand if it's for you or not. And
Of
look,
course.
I wrote a book. So I wrote a book called Go Do Deals, which there's a website which is actually godo.deals, and you can buy the book there. It comes with a 21-day free email course you can do as well. So that basically is the idea with that, is to stop people from taking the course. The idea is for them to literally see if it's for them, and if it's for them, of course they can come and do the course. But it's the polarizer. It lets people understand it enough to understand if it's something they want to do.
Yeah.
Alternatively, yeah, consume. We put loads of stuff out on YouTube, loads of content, but we give lots of ideas and
Yeah, you do.
structure around how these things work. So yeah, I'd much rather share all of that stuff up front rather than have our sales guys have to spend hours and hours and hours convincing people that they should do our anti-course. We much prefer people just come up and say, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to join. So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Does a lot of the legwork, or not the work, but pre-qualifies them or
yeah,
qualify.
yeah. And
Yeah,
also, look, we've been around forever, so we get people ringing us up going, "I've been watching this for 6 years, and I'd like to do it now." It's like,
exactly. All right, Jeremy. Well, any parting advice for anybody listening, entrepreneurs, business people, financial people, anything you'd like to say?
yeah, look, I mean, just boringly, action is the differentiator in terms of success or failure. You can sit around thinking about amazing things and coming up with amazing ideas, but getting off your ass and doing something is what differentiates the most successful people I've met from the people who are really smart but have never done anything with their lives. So be the guy that goes and does something.
Wonderful. All right, Jeremy. Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor, and I've learned a lot, and so have the listeners, if they were listening. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Take
Okay,
care.
man. You
See
have
you
a good
soon.
evening. Take care.
You too. Take care.